If Giuliani had dropped out of public view after 9/11, he would have been remembered as a hero. Who else stayed too long and ruined their reputation? Lance Armstrong. He was a hero here and abroad in the cycling community, and a household name as the greatest American cyclist in history, a sports legend. Then 2 years after a well-timed retirement, rich and with nothing but blue sky ahead, a possible political career was rumored. He decided to race again, and shortly thereafter was exposed as a doped-up cheater, had his whole winning record erased, had to pay through the nose in multiple fraud-related lawsuits, and is only spoken of now as a shameful example of who you don't want to be. Could have stayed retired and rested on his laurels. Ed. Grammar. Michael Owen. Hailed as a hero for Liverpool Football Club, went to Manchester United and destroyed his legacy, now released a second book and destroyed whatever thread of dignity he had, especially with Newcastle fans. Until he became a traitor, Benedict Arnold was one of America's biggest Revolutionary War heroes. There's a memorial at Saratoga that is just a statue of his boot. His leg was severely injured, without his name. If he had died in that battle, he'd be revered as much as Washington. Pun intended. Chris Christie was basically hailed as a hero for his role in guiding New Jersey's recovery after Hurricane Sandy, but then he decided to run for a second term, which led to Bridgerton. Bob Iger was initially seen as a hero for basically saving Disney from its late 90s early 2000s dark age, but started to rely way more on acquiring other people's IPs, Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilm, Fox, etc., instead of having Disney create its own. Likewise, Eisner oversaw the Disney Renaissance era that revitalized the company from a decades-long slump, only to see it falter again towards the end of his tenure. Tony Blair. Like there are people in the Balkans called Tony Blair because of the Balkans War, and when he started out he was charismatic and generally well liked. Then 9/11 happened and he got the UK involved in Afghanistan and Iraq with Bush. He's disliked on the right and the left. Still is hated. Roseanne was considered an absolute genius in the 80s, and even highly regarded as recently as 10 years ago. Her only major screw up till then was her national anthem incident, which could be chalked up to lack of practice skill. She was thought of so highly that they even resurrected her old TV show. Until one day. Ulysses Grant won the Civil War, beat Lee, and allowed him to surrender with respect. Hailed as a hero, now he's often remembered as a mediocre at best president. We all know the true mediocre presidents are the ones no one remembers, like James Buchanan. Chuck Norris. The man was an absolute monster with like 5 black belts who not only acted but was actively competing in America's fledgling martial arts scene and won over 30 tournaments. He also stuck up for his black opponents against biased judges in a time when few others would. He was world karate champion for 6 straight years. To this day he's still one of the most decorated martial artists in the world. But then his film career took off and then died and he spent all his time hawking Bowflexes until he became an internet meme caricature of himself until he wound up running for it to try getting minor politicians a few votes. Contrast this with Bruce Lee, a man who never competed outside maybe 2 matches in high school, achieved no formal ranks, and was known mostly for a few movies and in the Green Hornet. But he died young and everyone remembers him as an unstoppable badass grandmaster, and anytime someone says he was anything short of an invincible fight wizard it turns into a giant shitstorm. I wish I could remember the full story. Hopefully Reddit's history buffs will kindly fill in the gaps. There was a Roman general with many victories and battle scars to his name, who tried to become a senator or other important political figure after his military career. He gave an impassioned speech about all he'd done for his country thus far, and he was willing to do more. While he gave the speech, he was topless, showing off those scars I'd mentioned, and the effect made his rhetoric all the more effective. He made one stirring speech, and was already almost guaranteed to get his political office. But then, after that first speech, he gave another, and another, and another. Each one was more crazy and radical than the last. At some point, He was openly scornful of people and families with no ties to the military. He wanted to restructure the Senate. Patricians are kinda a bad idea. Wouldn't it be grand if we burned it all and started over? That kind of insanity. Faster than you can say I'm not sure this politician is all there. His magnificent speech and display lost its luster, and he quickly lost favor with the citizens and, inevitably, his shot at public office. I believe you'd be talking about C. Marcius Coriolanus, who may just be legendary. Geraldo Rivera, Lou Dobbs, Brit Hume, and other former journalists who've gone full nut job and become Fox News talking heads. Geraldo Rivera. I liked him in the Witcher series. Internet Explorer. Back in the day when it came out it was seen as the best thing ever. Now it's just the retarded cousin of all the other browsers. I still haven't read a good explanation for why Microsoft doesn't try to improve it to par with Chrome, etc. Ben Carson. He was a well-respected neurosurgeon that was raised from poverty and became famous after he performed a breakthrough separation of conjoined twins. He was an author of books, public speaker, and got a movie deal about his life. Then he went into politics and started saying nonsense, became an ally of the pea-grabber, even when the psychopath called him names and made fun of him. Now is just a crazy old dude which only purpose in government is to be the one African American in the administration. Nobody takes him seriously and his moral authority is null. How about Curt Schilling? Dude had a great career in the major leagues, and some iconic moments for the Red Sox and Diamondbacks. Now he's like a weird white nationalist guy who sneaks into the news every once in a while for saying something bigoted. Don't forget about how he started a video game company and ran it into the ground, costing himself $50 million and the state of Rhode Island around $60 million. James Woods was one a highly respected actor who had some great roles in utterly amazing movies, and now he just tweets in support of Trump Republican talking points non-stop. I like how Family Guy went back and renamed James Woods High. Sure, it was meant to pay respect to Adam West, but I think it was more about nixing James Woods. Lance Armstrong went from global icon to one of the biggest frauds and drug cheats in the history of sport. If he hadn't come out of retirement, USADA would have left him alone. We recently had an interesting inverse case in California. Our then Governor Jerry Brown had a stint as governor a few decades ago and ended his term fairly unpopular. Then he came back and did a 3rd fourth term after Schwarzenegger, who definitely did have his reputation tarnished in office due to some bad decisions. Brown basically cleaned the state up and people basically said they'd prefer a 5th Brown term to our current governor. Also, obligatory Kevin Spacey. Man, everyone went gaga over that guy. He is a great actor, but eventually he stayed in the business too long and got outed as a sexual harasser. Still, that post-scandal ad basically saying "so what? We both know you'll still want to watch me" was pretty hilarious and desperate. That Christmas video he did was freaking surreal. Notch, who was basically the face behind Minecraft, could have faded away as the creator of one of the most influential games to ever come out. Not anymore, though. Microsoft removed all references of him from the Minecraft credits. Your post reminded me I need to unfollow him on Twitter. Neil deGrasse Tyson. He was pretty well liked by the internet until he started sexually harassing co-workers and trying to downplay people shooting up schools. This, also him on Joe Rogan's podcast, made me hate him so much. Not a fan of Joe Rogan, but he was such an butthole. J.K. Rowling. If she had just kept her mouth shut, she could have forever been known as the author of the legendary Harry Potter books. Luckily no one will remember most of the nonsense in a while, maybe even within a decade. It'll all become a great till J.K. Rowling was weird on the internet, or whatever the equivalent is going to be when all your kids are reading the books. Linus Pauling was a chemist who won both the Nobel Prize in Chemistry and the Nobel Peace Prize. Later on he decided to jump into medicine and started to promote megadosing of vitamins. Without much scientific evidence, he claimed you should get several grams of vitamin C every day. Of course there was no evidence to support his claims. It shows how some very smart people are convinced they can be experts outside of their field without realizing how out of their depth they actually are. Wings of Redemption, an early Call of Duty YouTuber who was relatively liked among the community, until he couldn't put his money where his mouth was and lost a 1v1, raged and scammed his fans for $13,000 for a surgery that actually cost about $5,000. There's a lot more to it and I recommend you watch the Down the Rabbit Hole doc on him. Upvote for Down the Rabbit Hole. George Romero is the father of the zombie movie as we know it, but he also made some of the worst zombie films ever made. Should have stopped after Day of the Dead. Also, George Lucas ruined the original trilogy of Star Wars, which is somehow a bigger crime than the prequels. Similarly, Ridley Scott and the Alien films. George Romero is still remembered as a legend. How about Dennis Miller? He was great for a while, then sidled up to Bush and learned that punching down doesn't make for compelling comedy. I thought of him. Definitely a contender. James Watson. He one of the most important biologists and won a Nobel Award for his work in the DNA double helix. Nowadays he is famous for being racist and against black. He also stole a bunch of the work needed to prove the double helix from other scientists. Ben Motherfucking Carson. I idolized him after reading some of his books. Think Big, Gifted Hands, etc. The man started from a broken family in the hood to become one of the most accomplished neurosurgeons in the world. Truly an amazing life. And then he had to run for president, spewing nonsensical garbage from his mouth along the way. The saddest part is that as sake of housing, he has all but forsaken his own experiences with housing issues. Unbelievable. Turned out to be a loon and a huge liar about his own life. Let's never forget two very important things. 1. Everyone thought Donald Trump was a good businessman for a while until they actually cared enough to realize how full of crap he was. And 2. Mr. Rogers will never be on this list. George Lucas. If he had died after making The Empire Strikes Back, we'd all remember him as the genius who created Star Wars and Indiana Jones, and we'd all wonder what amazing things he would have come up with had he lived. J.K. Rowling. Harry Potter ended on a high note, and everyone liked how she was transitioning to mysteries. Then she went full Kanye when she started world building. Also, people would have tolerated Dumbledore being secretly gay back in 2007. But now she is jumping through increasing hoops to keep it secret rather than have him come out. How has no one mentioned Hitler yet? Dude pulled Germany out of recession before heading down the genocide route and would potentially have gone down in history as one of the world's most effective leaders had he died in the early 1930s. Hitler. If he would have just died from that gas in World War I, nobody would even know his name and he'd been on some memorial plaque somewhere. Don Bluth, Disney's first real competitor who eventually made so many bad films he was stuck in debt. Seriously, from Secret of NIHM to a troll in Central Park. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.